most of you know us as Quakers, but our real name is the Religious Society of Friends. And the term "speak truth to power" is attributed to Quaker civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, who influenced Martin Luther King and many others. A great recent example of speaking truth to power was tonight's speaker, Medea Benjamin, confronting the Reagan-era vampire, Elliot Abrams. He is now returned from the crypt as U.S. Special Representative for Venezuela when he testified before the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee hearing on Venezuela recently, and that was very, very impressive. When the U.S. desires regime change, we don't use Facebook, but we send in the Marines or the CIA. See Chile, Congo, Grenada, the Dominican Republic, and now perhaps Venezuela. Fortunately, we have Ms. Benjamin, Noam Chomsky, Amy Goodman, the spirit of Howard Zinn, and other heroes who won't let things go by that easily.
And what I have seen in the halls of Congress and in D.C. and around the country has been new energy around this Green New Deal. And it is something that has been around for a long time. If you ever listened to a Jill Stein speech from the Green Party, you would have heard her say always towards the end, and what we need is a Green New Deal, and she would explain it. And many people have been talking about it. But it really is the coming into office of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or as we know her, AOC, that has injected just a wonderful energy into the Washington scene and into this Green New Deal. And what I've been seeing in the environmental movement is, at one time, sort of like the peace movement, the environmental movement tended to be older white folks. And then you saw a lot of young people getting involved in the environmental movement. And then maybe they were graduates in their 20s or so. And then you see people who were even in college through the Sunrise Movement that have taken this on in a very spectacular way. And I thought, that is so amazing. You know, getting people who are in college to take these things on. And then you see Greta Thunberg in Sweden in high school galvanizes a worldwide movement of people in high school or under, in like elementary school. And so there have been these fantastic demonstrations of incredible young people. I was at one in Washington, D.C. just the other day when Ilhan Omar, who I'll talk about more, but has been so maligned viciously, her daughter was there. And her daughter is 16 years old, and her daughter is one of the organizers of the national high school campaign around the environment. And you should have seen the beaming Congresswoman watching her daughter and thinking, already we have the next generation that's not just fighting these issues, but doing it in a really a way that gets their other students involved in it, brings music, brings fun, brings joy, and that's what you're seeing with the Green New Deal. Now, of course, it's facing the stodgy, elderly white men like Mitch McConnell who want to make sure the Green New Deal never gets to see the light of day. But the Congress is usually sort of the last to catch on. And as people are getting more and more excited, and not just excited about the solution, they're getting more and more just, upset about what's happening to our planet, there is tremendous momentum. And I don't know if any of you got a chance to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez yesterday in Congress when this stuffy Republican, Sean Duffy, started criticizing the whole Green New Deal and saying that that was for elitists. And she got so angry and she started saying, are you crazy? Elitists? We're talking about the kids in my district who are dying from asthma. We're talking about the kids in Flint, Michigan, who will never be the same again because of the water they had to drink. I'm talking about the people in the Midwest whose homes and livelihoods are destroyed by these floods. We're talking about real people and real issues. And it was just, a beautiful response to this guy who is clueless, but she really represents, this kind of energy and this kind of determination. And Rusty said that I don't have to convince anybody here that issues of war and the environment are related. And I think that's probably true. But I just do want to say a couple of things about the connections between war and the environment. We have some people here who got involved in peace issues from the Vietnam War days. And I know we have groups like Veterans for Peace here. Because Veterans for Peace has been taking groups to Vietnam year after year, that the legacy of the 20 million gallons of herbicides that the U.S. dumped on Vietnam, including Agent Orange, are still being felt today. That the agriculture's been affected, the foliage, the forests, and of course people's lives with cancer and radiation. And so that is 50 years later. So these wars, we can come up to more modern times, and we see that another connection is resource wars. In the days of the Bush administration, they didn't say we're going in to invade Iraq because of their oil, although many of us said no wars for oil. But we did say that if the main export of Iraq were broccoli, the U.S. would have never invaded, and that is certainly true. And we do see that today the Trump administration is totally overt about it. Donald Trump himself said, we should have just gone in and taken their oil in Iraq and gotten out of there. And it is no coincidence that the two places where this Trump administration is setting its sights is Venezuela and Iran, countries that have tremendous amounts of oil. We also see scarcity of resources being a source of conflict. I looked today at this amazing chart a group called the Pacific Institute has, and if you get a chance to look at it, they have the history of water conflicts, and they go back to 3000 BC. So water conflicts is not something new. But what they say is that it's being exacerbated today by climate crisis, by overpopulation, and they give the example of Syria, where there was a terrible drought starting in 2007 that went on to 2012, and how it destroyed 75% of the livestock, how it destroyed so much of the agricultural land, and led to this massive migration of over 1 million people, closer to 2 million, who first started migrating into the cities. And they're not saying this was the cause of the war in Syria, but they're saying this aggravated the situation and made people look towards the government as a problem because the government could not find solutions to the crisis. And this was true in Egypt as well, that was experiencing a drought at the same time that there was the rise of the Arab Spring in Egypt. So we see a lot of connections. Many of you here have worked on the issue of Israel-Palestine, and you know how important the issue is of Israel stealing the Palestinian water, and how much that contributes not only to the problem, but it's a real issue in terms of looking for solutions, because the Israeli lifestyle now depends on water that comes from Palestinian lands. So there's all kinds of connections between the issues of the environment and issues of war and conflict. But when you look at where we can find solutions, and we look towards the Green New Deal as something that is offering very bold solutions, it is quite disappointing that those who are pushing this forward aren't making those connections strongly enough. Because when people ask either Alexandria, Ocasio-Cortez, or others, where is the money going to come from for the Green New Deal, and it needs a lot of money, they tend to say things like tax the rich, which is important to do, but it's still not enough because rich will always find ways to get around paying those taxes. And they say print more money, that this has been done for critical things before in our history, and that's true, and you can do that. But that's not enough of a solution either. If you want to look to where is the big, 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 big pot of gold in our treasury that gets given out by our members of Congress, it is the Pentagon budget. And we have to really push people to identify where that money is. And you know, when we talk about the discretionary funds, that's money that Congress can allocate for things, it's over half of that is going to the Pentagon. And if you compare our budget to any of the ones in the world, we are so beyond, in fact, close to what the entire world together spends, which is quite ironic when you see the Deputy Secretary of Defense speaking before Congress to justify the massive Pentagon budget. You know what he's using to justify it? Anybody take a guess?
Keeps people working.
Well, no, they don't. They say that, but he didn't say that. He said China. China, 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 he said. That's our big thing now. You know, the war on terrorism isn't giving, it's kind of wearing thin on people. So they need another one, and now that is China. So if you look at the budget that's being proposed by Donald Trump, it's really the antithesis to everything that people who care about people and the environment would stand for. Because it calls for cuts in things from food stamps to educational programs, massive cuts to the EPA, cuts even in the State Department, cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, cuts in affordable housing. But where the money then is allocated to is increases in the Pentagon. He's calling for close to a 5% increase in the Pentagon. And you know, there's a strategy they use to do this, is they put something out there that is so totally outlandish that even then some conservatives in the Congress will say, well, we can't go that far. They're calling for $760 billion. It's, quote, only 716 now. So they'll come to some, quote, compromise that'll be between the two, and it'll continue to be another huge handout for the Pentagon. Now let's remember, this is the Pentagon. Talk about winning a war with China. We can't win a war with the Taliban. Come on. And this is a Pentagon that can't pass an audit, has never been able to. The only entity in our government that has never been able to pass an audit. It was finally forced to take an audit last year and couldn't pass the audit. And there's so much money in the Pentagon budget that even Trump says we can take billions out of it for the wall, right? And it's a budget that calls for more money into nuclear weapons, when certainly it's a time when we should be forcing our government to join the UN ban on nuclear weapons and get rid of our nuclear weapons. Instead, it's putting more money into that and more money into this slush fund, the overseas contingency operations, which is really just in case we have another war, we want to have a lot of money in there. So it's a terrible budget, but it reflects the Trump administration, and unfortunately, it reflects most of Congress as well, because most of them year after year just rubber stamp these horrendous Pentagon budgets that rob us from the money we need for the Green New Deal.
I was thinking about a few things that came into my mind that maybe we should consider and talk about. One is the relationship between the immigration crisis and climate change, particularly in Central America, particularly in Honduras. And I was down in Tijuana, and I think you can see that very clearly. That's number one. And two, I wanted to talk about, just make a statement about what I think is quite important with the Green New Deal. And that is to talk about a transition and to talk about how jobs will be created. And that when we talk to people, we need to really, really emphasize that this is going to lead to losing of jobs in certain sectors, but really the gain of jobs in many other sectors. And for working class people, it's extremely important that we talk this way. That's just
Yeah, thank you. Both important points. In terms of migration, It's true of Central America, where there have been also this cycle of droughts and floods. And it's also true of the violence in Central America, so the combination of wars and climate chaos. And of course we see that throughout Northern Africa and in the Middle East. And when you see the mass migration to Europe, a lot of that was caused by climate chaos. And think of just what's going to come in the future when folks are talking about heat of 120, 130 degrees in some places where people are not going to be able to live, where they're going to have to flee. And we already see how Europe has been really a tremendous upheaval with the rise of the right, in part because of this migration. So it is a huge issue, and thanks for making that connection as well. And then the other thing you said was about the transition in jobs. And I don't know if any of you have seen this. It's a great study that's been updated that the University of Massachusetts did, showing how many more jobs that you could get through anything from education to healthcare, and particularly for green jobs, than the money that's invested in the military. So every time they say, we can't close down this factory because it's jobs, we have to say, transition, transition, transition. Yes.
So we all know that the U.S. government has frozen the money from Citgo and Venezuela's money in U.S. banks illegally. Can we get a list of those banks and start targeting those banks through our own direct action? So can we bypass, in a sense, this begging Congress for things only, and let's start hitting Citibank if that's who it is. Do you know which the banks are? We can boycott those banks, we can demand that they unfreeze the money that's desperately needed in Venezuela.
That's a fabulous idea. I didn't think of that, and I can find out what banks there are, and if you leave me a note, we'll follow up about that. I think it is a great idea, because we always have to look for targets that are not just Congress and not just standing outside the White House. So yes, I think it's a great thing to do, and you know it's billions of dollars that they have frozen, and it really is money that the Venezuelan government would spend a lot of it on medicines that are scarce right now.
My question has to do with, I guess, the Green New Deal, and if you could go into a little bit more detail in terms of your sense as to how quickly we can see Forces for Peace joining with the climate change movement, and is the Green New Deal the key? Thank you.
I think it's one of the keys, and that we should be looking for those opportunities wherever they are. A number of people have been involved in the Poor People's Campaign, and as part of the Poor People's Campaign, it took the Martin Luther King trilogy of racism, poverty, and militarism, and added environmental issues into that. And so every time there was a major gathering around the Poor People's Campaign, it brought all of these issues together, and still continues to do that. The Poor People's Campaign is strong in some cities and states and not so strong in others, but it's another good vehicle to use. The Green New Deal, you know, we and the group World Beyond War have proposed language to try to get added into the Green New Deal that talks about this relationship of war and environment, and also talks about the Pentagon funds as a place to get money from. And we're in sort of slow talks with people about that, but it would be nice to up the pressure on that and have it be really very clear in their materials. We as Code Pink always go out to any major environmental demonstrations with our War is Not Green banners, and we try to make sure that it's in the points, that the demonstration points of unity come about. So I think, you know, wherever there are opportunities, but certainly the Green New Deal is where there's a lot of momentum right now, so that should be a place that we are there in solidarity as part of, and I think we should all consider ourselves environmentalists as well, but try to insert these issues in. One of the reasons we supported the Iran nuclear deal is because it would stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon if indeed that's where they were going. We certainly want to see an end to nuclear weapons and phasing out of nuclear energy as well. It was very funny in Iran because we worked very hard to get the itinerary that we wanted, but there were a couple of things on the itinerary that they said you must go to, and they forced us to go to, and one of them was a nuclear reactor. And it was so funny because people in our group had been like you protesting nuclear energy for so many years. We don't want to go to a nuclear reactor, And they forced us to go, and their point was to say, we are using this for educational purposes and for medicines and for peaceful purposes. And we maintain this same position that we want to see a phasing out of all nuclear energy, and they said, it's one thing to be selective about what countries can do what, but internationally, by international law, we have the right to nuclear energy. And by international law, why is it that Iran is singled out around its nuclear program when nobody talks about Israel? And they talk a lot about Israel and Iran and say it has hundreds of nuclear weapons, and nobody ever says anything about it. The US government doesn't even admit it and doesn't do anything to force Israel to join the non-proliferation treaty or allow any inspectors into Israel. And they point to countries right by them, which is India and Pakistan, and say they never joined the non-proliferation treaty. Their weapons are totally illegal, and yet nobody's threatening them. So it's this selective kind of, we will target Iran. And another really bad thing is happening, which is young people who are against nuclear weapons in Iran are now rallying in favor of leaving the deal and saying, hey, we did the deal and then the US violated it. Let's pull out of the deal and let's get a nuclear weapon because that seems like the only way that we will have some respect. Look at North Korea. And it's a horrible thing for them to conclude, but you can certainly understand why they would go in that direction. And it was in the hearings today with Pompeo that one of the congresspeople brought out that there were secret agreements that the US has been providing technology for nuclear material to Saudi Arabia. And the Congress wants to know what those secret agreements are. And I thought it was kind of clever the way one of the guys, the congressman said it is, if we can't trust them with a bone saw, are we really going to trust them with nuclear material?
We're here at the meeting house of the Society of Friends, which is a religious organization, but it's just one religious organization. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about activating churches, more of them, acting more in unison. It seemed that was very important during the Vietnam War, but now we're in an era of perpetual war, which in a way almost makes it pale by comparison. And also, since I'm last in line, maybe I can ask you another, which is you mentioned a number of positions that you hope that presidential candidates would be taking and the ability to pressure them between each other. And there are so many wars, so many of those issues, and so many presidential candidates. Is there some kind of visual grid up somewhere right now where we can look and see where everyone stands on those issues?
So Rusty mentioned that I just did an article on that, and we're trying to put that into a graphic as well, but you can find the article on several websites like Common Dreams and Alternate and Truth Big and Truth Out, a number of them put it up. But it does go candidate by candidate on a number of those issues. And then in terms of the churches, the Poor People's Campaign is faith-based. And it has a lot of churches that are involved in it, particularly in the South. And there are quite a number of churches that are involved around the immigration issues. But around these issues of the wars, it's precisely the fact that there are so many different ones. And I would say about Yemen, there has been a very good interfaith group that has been working on this, Presbyterians, Methodists, Jewish groups, Muslim groups. So that is one area where I think we can see it as an example. And our hope is that once this finally passes both the Senate and the House in the same form and goes up to the President's desk, that this will be seen as an example both of using the War Powers Act, and we can use it in other situations, and also an example of this broad-based coalition that I mentioned, you know, left and right, but it really has quite a strong interfaith component to it as well.
Is there a tally of the cost of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? And imagine what we could do with that money.
Yes, there's a very good group called the National Priorities Project, and they have not only a cost of the war, they have the trade-offs of what you could get if, and how much each city and each state is spending on the wars and what you could use that money for. So I encourage you to go to National Priorities Project to look at that. There's also great work that has been done by Brown University, the Watson Institute there, that looks at the cost of the war in its totality, including healthcare for veterans for years to come, payment on the debt because of the war,